Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started. Okay, we're going to break this down. We're going to break everything down of this retrial. And joining me right now is attorney Terri Austin. Terri, great to see you. Good morning to you. I'm happy you're going to be with me this morning to break all of the cases down. And we're going to start with Winslow. What should we expect from a retrial? How does a retrial look different than the first trial?
The retrial is going to be a little more complicated because both of the attorneys basically are going to take the transcript and make sure that the witnesses are consistent, or if there are inconsistencies, they're going to point that out. So it's going to be a little more confusing, I think, for the jury, but that's essentially what happens when you get a case that's retried like this.
In other words, this is not a great situation for the Jane Does. There would be one thing for them to testify in the first trial, but now their stories have to match up to what they said in the first case, as you said, and that's a problem because even if they make a mistake, even if they somehow don't remember something, one slip-up could, in the eyes of the jury, mean that they're not telling the truth.
That's exactly right, Jesse. And with this Jane Doe number one, we already have credibility issues. She's already been shown not to be consistent with her preliminary hearing. And so now you have a situation where the jury has to figure out, is she telling the truth during her preliminary hearing? Did she tell the truth during the first trial? Is she telling the truth now? So there are going to be a lot of credibility issues here, and they're going to be looking at her demeanor, and her demeanor, even on this little clip that we just saw, is not that convincing. She said, well, we both jumped over the fence. This is a rape case, and you should be afraid, and your demeanor should be somewhat different from what her demeanor is right now.
The counter argument to that, of course, is it's hard to judge how anybody tells a story, but when you are trying to convince a jury of this man's guilt, they do have to be persuaded. And one of the things that is a big issue is the kidnapping charge. And when she was under cross-examination by the defense, they raised this issue of how did she get in the car exactly. So let's hear what happened. Okay, Terri, make sense of this for me if you can. Now her testimony is kind of in this box, so it has to match up to what she said in the first trial, but it also now has to match up to what she said in the preliminary hearing. How does her testimony change now if she testifies in the retrial? Because the prosecution can't coach her, right? They can't say, well, you slipped up a little bit on that answer. We need you to say, no, they can't tell her what to say. But again, with a 7-5 split on those charges wasn't great for the prosecution. What do they do with Jane Doe number one, and what do they tell her about testifying in the retrial?
They're going to have to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. It's going to be very difficult. And the prosecution here really is going to have to make her a much better witness. What we saw here is a really good cross-examination where the defense attorney is making a case that this was not forcible rape. Under the law, to be forcible rape, you either have to be physically threatened or mentally threatened. And here she's saying she admitted she wasn't threatened, at least at that point, and he wasn't physically forcing her. So I think when we have the retrial, the prosecution is going to have a very difficult time establishing the fact that she was indeed raped here.
Now, there are people who criticize her testimony and say it was not believable. However, with a 7-5 split, the jury look in favor of guilt. There was something that they believed, and obviously they're going forward with this count, these counts, and her testimony because it carries so much prison time and so much weight if they actually get these 3 convictions against him. But with so we're seeing this whole split down where everything lies. And again, just to let everybody know, the last charges for Jane Doe number 5 were actually dropped, so those are no longer in consideration. We're moving forward with 6 different charges. But the 7-5 split. So what does the prosecution need to do? I mean, they seem to convince them about something. What do you think the jurors held on to that might have worked?
I think the jurors held on to the other Jane Does, to tell you the truth. I think there was very little here in Jane Doe number 1 that they held on to. I do really believe that the prosecution is going to include these other Jane Does because they were very, very credible. And Jane Doe number 1 basically could not establish much at all when she got on the stand. Obviously, if it's a 7-5 split, some of the juries felt bad for her. I guess maybe they thought, what reason does she have to lie? But essentially, I do think that it was the other victims who helped her case here.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to play Jane Doe number 2's testimony after this break, and that was a win for the prosecution. Stay tuned. We'll be right back right after this.